global figures advocating for Palestine, the unheard voices. For several decades, the people of Palestine have endured unimaginable suffering under occupation, oppression, and violence. Since 1948, when many Palestinians were forcibly displaced from their homes during the establishment of Israel, they have faced systemic injustices, loss of land, forced evictions, military incursions, and severe restrictions on their freedom of movement. The Gaza Strip has been under a blockade for years, resulting in severe humanitarian crises, including limited access to basic necessities like clean water, food, medical care, and electricity. Countless families have been torn apart by violence, with children growing up in constant fear. Despite international calls for peace and justice, the Palestinians continue to face daily hardships under occupation, yearning for the right to self-determination and a life free from oppression. For decades, voices from across the globe, world leaders, prominent figures, religious authorities like the Pope, respected Jewish personalities, and countless advocates for justice, have spoken out passionately in support of the Palestinian people. From the halls of power to the streets of resistance, they have called for peace, equality, and an end to the suffering that Palestinians endure daily. These voices have come from different backgrounds, faiths, and ideologies, united by a shared belief in justice, human dignity, and the fundamental right to live free from oppression. Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, the Pope, and countless others have recognized the struggle of Palestinians as one of the greatest moral tests of our time. They've stood firm, calling for an end to the violence, occupation, and displacement that has haunted Palestine for generations. Even Jewish intellectuals and activists, like Noam Chomsky and Judith Butler, have expressed their deep solidarity with the Palestinian people, challenging the status quo and pushing for justice that transcends borders and faiths. But despite their unwavering pleas, the world has largely turned a deaf ear. Years of advocacy, protest, and diplomacy have been met with continued violence, silence, and inaction. The injustice persists, the suffering deepens, and the dreams of a free Palestine remain unfulfilled. This video is a call to awaken hearts and souls. It is a reminder that the voices for Palestinian freedom have been raised for years, but we, as a global community, have failed to truly listen. We've failed to act. The time has come to hear these voices, of leaders past and present, and to answer their call for justice, compassion, and lasting peace. Let this be a message that touches the core of our shared humanity and reminds us that every voice matters, and that it is never too late to stand on the side of justice for Palestine. This video brings together the powerful messages that these leaders have voiced over the years. Let us hear their words once more, reflect on their wisdom, and understand the moral call for justice and freedom for Palestine. It's time to listen, really listen, to what they have said. Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, has repeatedly called for an end to the Israeli occupation and supported Palestinian aspirations for statehood. During his tenure at the UN, Ban emphasized the need for a two-state solution and condemned violence on both sides. He has called for Israel to end its settlement expansion and for Palestinians to be granted their rights. The Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory must end. José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, former Prime Minister of Spain, has been an advocate for Palestinian rights and a two-state solution. During his tenure, Spain took a more proactive role in supporting Palestinian self-determination. Zapatero's government also supported Palestinian membership in international organizations and called for Israel to end the occupation of Palestinian territories. José said, "We will always support the right of the Palestinian people to live in peace and dignity in their own state." Pope John Paul II, head of the Catholic Church and one of the most influential religious figures of the 20th century, was a vocal advocate for peace in the Middle East and supported Palestinian rights. During his 2000 pilgrimage to the Holy Land, he called for respect for Palestinian self-determination and urged a peaceful resolution to the conflict. In 1984, the Vatican officially recognized the Palestine Liberation Organization. The Palestinian people have a natural right to their homeland. Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez, the late president of Venezuela, was a vocal supporter of the Palestinian cause. He openly criticized Israeli policies, particularly during military conflicts with Palestinians. In 2009, Venezuela severed diplomatic ties with Israel in protest of its actions in Gaza. Chavez said, "The Israelis criticize Hitler but have done something worse. His government provided humanitarian aid to Palestinians and maintained close relations with the Palestinian leadership, positioning Venezuela as one of the most outspoken countries in Latin America on this issue."
Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb. Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb is a Jewish-American rabbi and a longtime advocate for Palestinian rights. As one of the first female rabbis in the United States, she has actively participated in interfaith dialogues and has supported the Palestinian-led BDS movement. Gottlieb has been a consistent voice calling for an end to the Israeli occupation. She once said, "Judaism teaches us to stand with the oppressed, and in this case, that means standing with Palestinians." Her advocacy is rooted in her interpretation of Jewish teachings on justice and peace.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu. South African Anglican bishop and theologian, a key figure in South Africa's anti-apartheid movement, has been a vocal critic of Israel's policies in Palestine. He condemned the treatment of Palestinians, comparing it to South Africa's apartheid regime. In a widely quoted statement, Tutu remarked, "What's being done to the Palestinians at checkpoints, for us, it's the kind of thing we experienced in South Africa." Tutu consistently advocated for peaceful solutions and spoke out against violence on both sides, but his strong criticism of Israeli policies made him a significant voice in the global discourse on Palestine. Hetty Epstein. A Jewish Holocaust survivor and a human rights activist, devoted much of her life to advocating for Palestinian rights. Epstein was deeply critical of Israeli policies and was involved in several initiatives aimed at raising awareness of the plight of Palestinians, including participating in the Gaza Freedom Flotilla in 2010. She said, "The oppression of Palestinians must end, and the world must recognize their right to self-determination." Epstein's personal history as a Holocaust survivor gave her a unique and powerful voice in the movement for Palestinian rights. José Saramago. The Portuguese Nobel laureate José Saramago was one of the most outspoken literary figures in support of the Palestinian cause. He compared the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories to apartheid and genocide, particularly after visiting the West Bank. Saramago once said, "What is happening in Palestine is a crime we can put on the same plane as what happened at Auschwitz." Saramago's sharp criticism of Israeli policies brought attention to the Palestinian struggle within the literary world. Malcolm X. The African-American civil rights leader Malcolm X also expressed solidarity with the Palestinian cause. In his speeches and writings, he drew connections between the oppression faced by Black Americans and the Palestinian people. In one of his essays, he wrote, "The Palestinian Arabs are our brothers, and they are struggling for their freedom just like we are struggling for ours. Their cause is the cause of all people who fight for freedom." Malcolm X's support for Palestinian liberation was rooted in his broader views on Norman Finkelstein, a Jewish-American political scientist and author, has been a fierce critic of Israeli policies and a strong advocate for Palestinian rights. With parents who were Holocaust survivors, Finkelstein has used his personal history to argue against the exploitation of the Holocaust to justify the oppression of Palestinians. In his influential books, such as The Holocaust Industry and Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine Conflict, he challenges dominant narratives about Israel and highlights the injustices faced by Palestinians. He has stated, "The real issue is that the Palestinians are an occupied people. Israel is an occupying power, and the Palestinians are an oppressed people, living under a brutal military occupation. Their struggle is a struggle for justice." Finkelstein's work has been instrumental in shaping critical discourse on the Israel-Palestine conflict and advocating for Palestinian justice. Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro, the former leader of Cuba, was a strong advocate for the Palestinian cause throughout his political career. Castro condemned what he perceived as Israeli aggression and supported Palestinian liberation movements. In 2014, during Israel's military offensive in Gaza, he said, "The State of Israel creates the Nazi version of apartheid in this region." Castro's solidarity with Palestine was part of his broader commitment to anti-imperialist and anti-colonial struggles around the world. Ilan Pappé. Ilan Pappé, an Israeli historian and author, is one of the most outspoken critics of Israeli policies toward Palestinians. In his book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, Pappé argues that the creation of Israel involved the systematic expulsion of Palestinians from their homeland. Pappé has also supported the boycott, divestment, and sanctions (BDS) movement. He said, "The Palestinians are living under an oppressive and brutal occupation." Pappé is a strong advocate for Palestinian human rights and a one-state solution where both Jews and Palestinians can coexist with equal rights. King Faisal bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. King Faisal of Saudi Arabia was a strong advocate for the Palestinian cause. During his reign, he was a staunch supporter of Palestinian rights and a fierce critic of Israel's occupation. He played a key role in the 1973 oil embargo, using oil as a political tool to pressure Western nations, especially the U.S., to reconsider their support for Israel. "The Palestinian issue is our first cause, and we will not accept any compromise." King Faisal's support for the Palestinians was rooted in his broader pan-Islamic vision and his commitment to Arab unity in the face of Israeli expansion.
George Galloway, a British politician and broadcaster, is another vocal supporter of the Palestinian cause. Galloway has participated in numerous humanitarian missions to Gaza and has been a harsh critic of Israel's treatment of Palestinians. In Parliament, he has repeatedly condemned Israeli military actions and called for an end to the occupation. He once said, "Palestine is the greatest moral cause of our time." Galloway has remained steadfast in his advocacy for Palestinian self-determination and human rights.
Muhammad Ali. The legendary boxer Muhammad Ali was another high-profile figure who supported Palestinian rights. Ali, known for his outspokenness on global issues, spoke out in favor of Palestinian self-determination. In 1980, he made headlines when he visited Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon and expressed solidarity with the Palestinian struggle, stating that Palestinians deserve to have a homeland. Che Guevara. The revolutionary icon Che Guevara also expressed his support for Palestinian liberation. Although Che was more directly involved in Latin American revolutions, his anti-colonial and anti-imperialist stance made him sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. During his travels in the 1960s, Guevara met with Palestinian leaders and expressed solidarity with their struggle, seeing parallels between the Cuban fight for independence and Palestinian resistance. Pope Benedict XVI, head of the Catholic Church, continued the Vatican's policy of advocating for peace in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and called for the creation of a Palestinian state. During his 2009 visit to the region, Benedict expressed concern for the plight of Palestinians, particularly those living in Gaza, and emphasized the need for a peaceful solution. Let the two states find peace and security in mutual recognition and dignity. Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. Sheikh Zayed, the founding father and first president of the UAE. He was a strong advocate for the Palestinian cause. Throughout his reign, he provided significant financial and political support, particularly for infrastructure projects and aid to Palestinian refugees. He was a vocal critic of Israeli policies and worked to unite Arab nations in support of Palestine. Palestine is at the heart of every Arab and Muslim, and we will not rest until justice is served. Albert Einstein. The renowned physicist Albert Einstein, although a supporter of the establishment of a Jewish homeland, expressed reservations about Zionist policies, particularly if they would lead to the displacement or oppression of the Palestinian Arab population. In 1938, he wrote, "I should much rather see reasonable agreement with the Arabs on the basis of living together in peace than the creation of a Jewish state." Einstein believed in peaceful coexistence and was critical of aggressive nationalism that could harm Arab-Jewish relations. Pope Francis, head of the Catholic Church, has also shown sympathy for the Palestinian cause and called for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. On several occasions, he has advocated for mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and a two-state solution. In his 2014 visit to the Holy Land, Pope Francis remarked, "May the two-state solution become a reality and not remain a dream." His words reflected the Vatican's long-standing position that peace in the region can only be achieved through dialogue, mutual recognition, and an equitable solution that respects the rights of both Israelis and Palestinians. Marlon Brando. The legendary actor Marlon Brando, known for his social activism, spoke about the injustice faced by Palestinians. In a 1990 interview, he commented on the biased portrayal of Palestinians in the media and how their plight was often ignored in Hollywood. He stated, "Hollywood is run by Jews, it is owned by Jews, and they should have a greater sensitivity about the issue of people who are suffering." While this comment was controversial, Brando aimed to highlight the need for a more balanced and sympathetic portrayal of Palestinians and their struggle in the American media. Jimmy Carter. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter has spoken extensively on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, particularly in his book Palestine, Peace Not Apartheid. He emphasized the need for a two-state solution and urged Israel to adhere to international law in its treatment of Palestinians. In his 2006 book, he wrote, "Israel's continued control and colonization of Palestinian land have been the primary obstacles to a comprehensive peace agreement in the Middle East." Carter's efforts have focused on promoting peace and urging the international community to address the Palestinian cause with fairness and justice. Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky, an American linguist, philosopher, and political activist, has been a prominent critic of U.S. foreign policy and Israel's treatment of Palestinians. He has consistently spoken out against the occupation and the denial of Palestinian rights. In his numerous writings and speeches, Chomsky has referred to the situation in Gaza as the world's largest open-air prison. He has also argued that the U.S. and its allies play a significant role in perpetuating the conflict. Noam said, "Israel has been able to act with impunity because it has the backing of the most powerful state in the world." Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, leader of the Indian independence movement, spoke out on the Palestinian issue in the early 20th century, opposing colonialism and foreign rule, which he saw mirrored in British Mandate Palestine. While not directly taking sides in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, he expressed sympathy for the Palestinians. In a 1938 article in Harijan, he wrote, "Palestine belongs to the Arabs in the same sense that England belongs to the English or France to the French. It is wrong and inhuman to impose the Jews on the Arabs." Gandhi's support for the Palestinian cause stemmed from his broader philosophy of anti-colonialism and self-determination, advocating for peaceful resolution and coexistence while being critical of the forceful establishment of a Jewish state at the expense of the Palestinian Arab population.
Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, the iconic anti-apartheid leader and South Africa's first black president, was a strong supporter of the Palestinian struggle. He often compared apartheid in South Africa to the situation in Palestine, viewing both as struggles against oppression. One of his famous quotes on the issue is, "We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians." Mandela saw the Palestinian struggle as a just cause for self-determination and human rights, consistently expressing solidarity. While he advocated for peaceful dialogue, he also recognized the Palestinian right to resist occupation.
Many other prominent figures from around the world, from various countries and fields, including artists, politicians, Nobel laureates, intellectuals, and human rights advocates, have raised their voices in defense of the Palestinian people, condemning Israeli oppression. Despite their calls for an end to the suffering endured by Palestinians, these pleas for justice have largely fallen on deaf ears. The global silence and lack of decisive action have allowed the ongoing oppression to persist, leaving these voices unheard. Countless individuals who have aligned with the Palestinian cause have continued to witness systemic injustice and violence. While their voices have been loud and their efforts unwavering, the global community has failed to heed their calls for change. As we reflect on the powerful words of leaders, activists, and advocates from around the world, it becomes clear that their calls for justice have long echoed, but the world has not truly listened. Despite decades of pleas for peace, equality, and an end to oppression, we have stood by while injustice has continued to unfold. We have failed to act on the urgent need for a fair and lasting solution. The suffering of the Palestinian people is a shared failure, a failure of humanity, a failure of compassion, and a failure of justice. It is now up to all of us to recognize that this is not just a political issue, but a human issue. We must stand together, raise our voices, and ensure that these calls for justice are no longer ignored. Only then can we begin to make amends for the silence and inaction of the past, and finally move towards a future where peace, freedom, and dignity are a reality for all.